Good morning, everyone. It is Monday, November 2nd, and the start of a new weekly reading vlog. So, as far as my physical reading, I am going to continue in The Iron Jackal by Chris Wooding. I barely started this. I've been focusing on my audiobook recently, so I just am not very far into this at all. But I know I'm gonna love this one. So this is the third book in the Cuddy J series, a space pirate series. So if you like space pirates, would recommend. I also have the audiobook for this one. I've listened to the first two only physically, or I've read the first two only physically, and I actually have the audiobook of this one as well, so I'm going to read physically while listening to the audiobook, so I'm very excited about that. So, and this is a pretty long one, so, or a decently sized one, so this one is definitely going to take a minute to get through, but that's my physical reading plans for the week as far as audiobooks. So I'm currently 60-70% of the way through Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is the second book in the Diviner series that follows so people with magical abilities. And in the first book, for example, a character can kind of touch an object and see part of its history or read part of its history. And they use these abilities to, in the first book, solve a murder mystery, and there's, you know, more going on in the second one, and it's been great so far. So I'm going to finish that. I also have hopes of reading The Voting Booth tomorrow on election day. We'll see how this goes. And I mean, all of this is going to be going up after election day, as well as my TBR. I just recorded my TBR yesterday, and it's honestly probably going to go up after election day, but I mentioned that in that video as well, or mentioned my plan in that video as well. But I'm going to hope to read The Voting Booth tomorrow. See if I can just finish it all in one day, and we might not actually find out who won the election tomorrow. Probably won't find out who won the election tomorrow, but I just figured it would be interesting to actually read it on the day that the book is set. So that's going to be an audiobook plan for this week. I also have Well Played by Jen DeLuca out on Libby, so that is probably going to be the audiobook that I turn to after Lair of Dreams and The Voting Booth. So we'll see if I can get to anything else this week beyond those audiobooks. If I can, of course, I'll keep you updated and keep you updated on what I think about those books, but those are going to be the plans for at least this part of the week, and we'll see what can happen after that. Good morning. It is Thursday, November 5th. I have a couple of updates. One, I was able to start and finish The Voting Booth by Randy Colbert on Tuesday on election day. This entire book takes place on election day. It's a pretty short book. It's a 6-hour audiobook, and you know, I listened at 1.8 times speed, or at least I did for that book, and so I was able to get through it relatively quickly, just like during the morning, during lunch break, after work. And so, yeah, as I said, this entire book takes place on election day. You follow two main POVs. You follow Marva and Duke, and Marva is very passionate about politics, very passionate about encouraging people to vote and talking about the issues that she cares about. Duke is also very excited to vote, potentially a little bit less involved in politics than Marva is, but he's in line to vote. There were some issues. He wasn't on the list at that polling place, and so, you know, Marva comes up and is trying to figure out what's going on, and she offers to kind of help take him around and make sure that he gets to the right polling place, because he thinks it might be tied to a different address and he might need to go to a different polling place. There's a whole adventure there. They're getting to know each other. You know, there's just like a whole bunch of stuff going on. You kind of find out more about the history of his family, some family stuff going on with her. She also has some stuff going on with her boyfriend, and you know, so all of that. And she also, her cat goes missing. Like, there's just like a whole bunch of other stuff kind of going around or going on. There's just a whole bunch of other stuff going on as they're trying to figure out how to make sure he can vote, and you know, it's just a whole adventure of a day where they start to get to know each other and you know, kind of talk about a bunch of issues. as she makes sure he can vote and make sure that other people can vote. It was just a fun story. It was overall pretty lighthearted. She does talk about a lot of serious issues in this book. Does it in a relatively lighthearted way. She kind of touches on some issues. There are only a few that kind of delve into more deeply, I think. Again, it's a short book. It's a short YA book. And so, you know, there's some issues that she goes into, some issues that she touches on in this book. But overall, it's a pretty fun, lighthearted book. That was just a fun one to listen to, in particular on election day. It was just kind of, yeah, it was a fun experience. It's not a book that I think I'm going to think too much about. You know, as a book, I'm not going to think about it too much in the future. It's not going to be a book I think that has a super long-lasting impact on me. But it was fun. It was fun. And I also finished Lair of Dreams by Libba Bray. This is the second book in the Diviner series. And I think I described what the Diviner series was in a previous clip. So this second book is a fun continuation from the first one. So it kind of felt like the first one could kind of be read on its own, and it would be interesting to find out if she wrote the first one, if Libba Bray wrote the first one and then was able to get a deal for the rest of them or something. Because there are definitely threads in the first one that can make it feel like there are some things you can make a series out of that. But the first one also felt more standalone than most first books in a series that I've read. And the second one kind of felt like she was setting up, now that she could write a series out of this, the second book was kind of setting up the rest of the series, if that makes sense. So in the second one, you kind of focus on, so as I said, some of these people have different abilities. Some of them are dream walkers and can kind of use or kind of go into other people's dreams and kind of do different things and influence their dreams, I guess. And in the second one, there's a sleeping sickness going around, and in this, people essentially kind of fall asleep and aren't able to wake up and basically die after a certain period of time. And so this kind of sleeping sickness is going around, and so you kind of follow, you know, you're introduced to a few new people, but you're kind of following this cast of characters after the events that take place in the first book, The Diviners, and you just kind of follow what they're up to after the Diviners, but you also follow some of these dream walkers trying to figure out what's going on with this sleeping sickness. There's, of course, Libba Bray deals with a whole bunch of other issues in this book. You know, the sleeping sickness is kind of blamed on certain immigrant groups. You hear the stories of different immigrants as you get to know different people's families throughout the story, and so you really kind of get a sense of, you know, dip into different lives around 1920s New York, around this cast of characters, and kind of get a sense for the racism that some of these characters were experiencing. She also delves into a bunch of other stuff, but it's a super interesting series. I really love Libba Bray's writing. This is a really interesting cast of characters. There definitely were some that I liked. So one of the characters was one that I actually really enjoyed in the first book, and kind of there were some things in the second one that changed about her character that I was like, okay, now you're a bit annoying. But overall, it was a really fun edition. Of course, I listened to it on audio because January Lavoie narrates and is absolutely brilliant. So I really enjoyed listening to this one on audio. I definitely want to keep going with the rest of the series because there are threads that you can kind of see where the story is going, and I'm very intrigued to see what's going on and very intrigued to continue the rest of the series. I probably will continue to do that throughout October, so maybe October next year I can read the next two, or kind of around this time, because it's super fun to read the series around Halloween and kind of get that spooky vibe going. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, those are the two updates. I'm currently listening to Well Played by Jen DeLuca, and then reading the Iron Jackal. Physically, I'm still not very far in that and haven't made much more progress, but that's what I'm currently reading, and I will check in later. Good morning. It is Monday, October 9th, and time to wrap up this week's reading vlog. It's been a good week finishing The Voting Booth and Lair of Dreams. I have a couple more updates. I finished Well Played by Jen DeLuca. So this is the second in a series of companion contemporary adult romance novels that center around a Renaissance fair in a small town where this Renaissance fair is held, and some of the characters who work this Renaissance fair and live in this town. And the first book follows Emily and Simon. Absolutely love the first book. The second book follows Stacy, who works with Emily in the tavern at this Renaissance fair. And I knew I might not like this one as much, and I double checked the synopsis to make sure that this all was in the synopsis, and it is. So I knew this one involved catfishing, which I knew I probably wouldn't like as kind of a trope or a basis for a story as much as the first one, and indeed I didn't. So Stacy has been hooking up with one of the band members. They have a band that plays at the Renaissance Fair every year, and she's kind of gotten together with one of the guys in this band the past couple of summers and is thinking that she might be able to again. She's wondering if she kind of wants something more with this guy, and it takes place after the events of the first book, so it's after the events of the first book, kind of leading up, the year leading up to the next Renaissance Fair. And so she kind of starts talking to this guy online that she thinks is the guy that she's kind of hooked up with a couple of times, and turns out it's another guy, the guy that she thought she was talking to. It's his cousin who manages the band. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of a shitty thing to do to someone, and I wasn't sure how it would be handled or if I would even like the main love interest after doing something like that. And indeed I didn't particularly like him. I was like, that's a terrible thing to do to someone. He continued to lie to her after that, after finding out that they kind of know what's going on. And yeah, so he lied to her about something else, and Stacy just keeps forgiving him for a bunch of stuff, and I was like, why are you forgiving him? Like, why? And I know it's always more complicated than that, and it's hard to turn feelings off even if someone does something shitty. So there were some things that were understandable, but I just didn't like it as much as the first one because I just didn't really connect with the love interest and kind of the relationship between the two main characters. I still love Stacy. I still love the writing. Jen DeLuca's writing is still so much fun. I still love the world and the characters. It was fun to see some of the characters from the first story again, and I still love listening to it. Brittany Presley is a 10 out of 10 as a narrator. I love her. So I still enjoyed listening to it. It was still just fun to listen to, and it was so much fun to be back in this world. But I don't know if this one is going to be one that I want to reread, unlike the first one. And we'll see what happens with the third one. I still have a lot of hope for the third one, but we'll see. Okay, so I didn't love it as much. I still had a good time listening to it. It's not like I regret listening to it at all. I just, because of some of the tropes, I just couldn't connect with some of the characters and the love story as much. Anyway, so the next story I finished, or the next book I finished, I also listened to an audio from the library, and that is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So huge trigger warnings for suicide and suicidal thoughts. So if you don't even want to hear a book review or a discussion about a book that heavily talks about that as a topic, then I'll leave an image of the book here, so just kind of skip ahead until you don't see the image of the book. And yeah, it's perfectly understandable. Anyway, so this book follows Nora, and it starts off with Nora on her last day before she commits suicide. And so you kind of follow glimpses of her last day. The book doesn't actually talk much about the actual act of her committing suicide. You know how she commits suicide, but you just kind of get glimpses, and it just kind of counts down to 0. essentially to midnight, or until the hour that she commits suicide. So you just kind of jump straight to her thinking that she's dead, and she kind of, you know, is in this weird place. She sees a building, turns out it's this library, and the librarian in this library is someone that she actually knows from her life. And the librarian explains that she is in the Midnight Library, and that the books on the shelves represent, or are kind of stories from her life as it would be if she had made different decisions. And so you have an infinite number of lives to choose from, essentially, that are kind of taking place, that represent what you would, or the life that you would have, or are living in a different alternate world where you made different decisions. And so there's also a book of regrets that is in this library. That's the only book that's not a life that she could have lived, but there's a book of regrets that kind of goes over some of the regrets from her base life, is kind of what her life up until that point is referred to as. And so she looks at some of these regrets, she goes through and asks the librarian to find her life where she makes some different decisions to kind of help take care of some of these regrets. And as she's going through a bunch of these different lives, she's realizing that some of the regrets that she had potentially weren't really something that she should regret, or she's exploring how in these different lives, even if that one regret maybe is resolved, there are other trade-offs that life comes with. And she's also learning more about her base life and the impact that she had on people in her base life. And it was just such a beautiful story. I loved the writing. I was very emotional throughout good portions of this story. But I thought the writing was absolutely beautiful. It's a very interesting way to do a character. So I can definitely see people finding it difficult to truly feel like they know or understand Nora, because really you only get glimpses of her in her base life and in some of these different lives. And really the only kind of the main character development, I guess, is kind of with the conversations that she's having with the librarian. So when you jump into some of these other lives, you don't jump into that life at the point of that decision being changed and getting to see from that point how your life might have unfolded. She's 35 when she commits suicide, and so she jumps into these different lives at age 35 where she was at. So she might have, the decision that she was changing, that decision might have happened 10 years ago, and she's already 10 years into this new life after the point of changing that decision. And so most of the book is kind of her jumping into these different lives, just trying to figure out what's going on and who she is in this life, and how her relationships with different people have changed, or what her situation is like in that life, and just trying to orient herself. That's most of kind of different portions of this book. And so it's a very interesting way to do it, and I think it's done for a reason. So I think it's done that way so that you intentionally don't necessarily get to know Nora as a character as well, because I don't think the point of the book is really to get to know Nora necessarily. It's to be able to put yourself in her situation and see how you would react, or how you would feel if given the chance to explore some other lives where maybe you made different decisions. But, anyway, I thought it was a beautiful book, beautifully written. I think it's going to be one of my favorites, and I definitely want a physical copy to annotate, because the writing was really, really good. Anyway, so that is my reading week. It went really well overall, and I'm very excited about what I have on deck for the next week as well. And I'm about to start the next reading vlog. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you're excited to read any of these books. Let me know how your reading week went. And be sure to subscribe for more bookish content. I will leave my Twitter and Instagram link down below. That's where I like to hang out. I'll leave more information down below on how you can support the Black Lives Matter movement, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.